Yeah, there's no one else that's running from either party that has any background whatsoever in criminal justice. And I was an assistant United States attorney for 6 years. I was the state's attorney in Montgomery County for 8 years. We had the Beltway snipers and so many other high profile cases. And then I was your attorney general for 8 years. And so I've been involved with criminal justice. I argued in front of the Supreme Court of the United States and won a case 9-0 against a sex offender. So I'm really excited about this issue. It's unfortunately, it is now the highest concern of Maryland voters throughout the state, higher than education and the economy is public safety. And the government's number one role is to make sure its people are safe. So I'm really excited about bringing crime down, but also bringing justice up. I was the head of the NAACP Criminal Justice Committee in Montgomery County starting in 1989. I've been working on police accountability issues, police reform issues, but also making sure we back our police officers. In fact, part of my plan calls for hiring 1,000 new police officers, making sure we bridge the trust gap between law enforcement and the communities they serve, making sure we have community prosecution implemented throughout the state, making sure that we have drug courts. I started the first drug courts in Maryland's history. I started the first domestic violence courts in Maryland's history. I want to make sure all 24 jurisdictions have domestic violence and drug courts so we don't over jail our citizens, and we help them get out of jail and be productive citizens. And we want to make sure our police officers are better trained. We want to target guns and violent criminals. And we want to make sure that all our police officers, as well as, by the way, our students in our schools, but police officers have access to mental health training, because that, particularly in the wake of COVID, is become a bigger and bigger issue. Well, for starters, we need a governor that supports law enforcement. And as a federal, state, and local prosecutor for 22 years, working hand in hand with law enforcement, you'll recall during the Beltway snipers, I led the Joint Sniper Task Force. We had 1,400 law enforcement officers from all over, well, the state and the country, federal, state, local, and we worked together to bring that case to a close in 22 days. That is where you start, and you support your law enforcement officers. You pay them adequate in wages. You make sure they're trained. You make sure they have the tools they need, access to mental health, and really bridge that gap between law enforcement and the communities they serve. So it is a real issue. I know it's anecdotal, but it's actually real. Montgomery County, for example, a jurisdiction of 1.1 million people, there were 13 people in the academy. That's unacceptable. And so we really need to put a focus on that. And the way you can do that is by having a governor who works with local officials and county officials and city officials to make sure we bring those officers in and get the highest quality officers. Well, first of all, there's no gap in the sense that people still want to be safe, and people have not been this afraid of crime since the Beltway snipers. So I think people really want to be safe, and they want to not only feel safe, but they want to be safe. And so they need somebody who understands criminal justice to help that along. And so when I was state's attorney, we put every police shooting in the grand jury, for example. We made sure we built that trust between the community and the law enforcement that serves them. But I think, we also identified and removed many police officers that were not good police officers. And that's one of the reasons why we have not had these issues in Montgomery County. And that's what I can speak to, where I was the state's attorney, where we had 1.1 million people and we counted our murder rate in the teens every year. Right now in Baltimore City, for example, there's almost 400 murders a year in a jurisdiction half the size. So we need to make sure that we have somebody that's supportive of public safety, but while bringing crime down, bringing justice up. And that's what I've spent my career doing. And people recognize that. So are there some bad police officers? Absolutely. Should they be removed from the force? Absolutely. But most of the police officers are there to protect us, protect our lives, risking their lives for a de minimis amount of money. So I think we have to get more police officers and support them more. And is there a distrust from members of the community? Yes, but that's why we need to have more training for our police officers accessible and more diversity within our police force. And the last point on the schools, SROs actually work quite the contrary. When you have school resource officers there, they identify and work with students that are creating trouble, and they work with the parents, the administrators, the teachers to solve those problems. Now, if there's a gun involved or something, a major crime, they obviously have to go into the criminal justice system. But it actually identifies, and instead of when you don't have SROs, the administrators, the teachers, understandably call law enforcement, and those kids are arrested and brought into the juvenile system. I'm the only pragmatic, pro-business, small business and large business, pro-public safety candidate in the Democratic field. And so I am very interested in making sure our businesses thrive, and the people who work for those businesses thrive as well. When I was president of all the attorneys general in the United States, we had the national mortgage foreclosure crisis, and I fought the big banks to get almost $2 billion into Maryland to keep people in their homes and therefore in their jobs. And I look forward to having that same ability to make the levers of government work to help with businesses. And so, the inflation rate is somewhat out of control of the governor of a state, but certainly making sure we support our small businesses and bringing other businesses to the state is, I think, critical, as well as helping our working families. In terms of mass transit, that is one of the ways we can help our businesses by making sure that we actually finish the Purple Line. It's $1 billion behind over cost, 4.5 years behind schedule. That's unacceptable. So in my administration, obviously, we're going to have streamlined procurement and effective and efficient procurement to help work with the Purple Line. We need to make sure that we have, you talked about 270, we need to make sure that we're not just pushing the bottleneck further up. So we need to make sure that we have mass transit connecting Shady Grove and Frederick, as well as in the short term, enhancing our MARC train system. So there's not just three trips a day going from Frederick into DC and back. And we need to make sure that we actually do the Red Line up in Baltimore, where 1/3 of the people in Baltimore City don't have cars, and so therefore they can't get to their jobs. So mass transit is going to be critical. We need to build have the metro go over the Wilson Bridge, for which it was built. We need to make sure we have Southern Maryland Transit from Branch Avenue into Charles County. We have an enormous amount of money available for infrastructure. And one of the things we need to make sure is that when 270 is expanded, which the governor Hogan has done, and elections do have consequences, that those cars that are actually on 270 on all our highways are electric vehicles. So we need to make sure we have the infrastructure in place so that people can, in fact, buy those electric vehicles that the car manufacturers are going to be making, whether we like it or not. So we're woefully behind on the infrastructure here in Maryland, and that has to become a priority. Well, no one likes to pay tolls, but the fact of the matter is that was designed as a P3 project by this governor, and so the issue is whether we should have tax dollars paying for that or the private sector paying for that. And I think people would like to have the private sector paying for that, so we can use our infrastructure money for mass transit that is so desperately needed throughout the state. So that's I think that's where it is now, and I think that if we are going to build that project, if that project is going to go forward, it has to be done through proper procurement, has to be done in an environmentally friendly way. I mean, the American Legion Bridge has to be rebuilt. No one wants to play hot potato to see if they're the one driving over the bridge when it collapses. So that needs to be done, but we need to make sure that we do it in an equitable, fair, and environmentally friendly way. I'm the only candidate running for governor of the Democratic Party who has a record on environmental issues, fighting to fight climate change and to protect our Chesapeake Bay. So we need to make sure that that project is done in an environmentally friendly way, an equitable way, and to make sure that we have the infrastructure for electric vehicles so that when there are cars on that highway, they are not producing fossil fuels. If we were going to have a third span, it obviously should be along with where the other two are, just for basic infrastructure and environmental needs. I put that as a very, very low priority in terms of the projects, the very expensive projects that we're looking at in Maryland. I just think there's so many other, the Purple Line and the Red Line being higher priorities, the connecting Shady Grove to Frederick, making sure we enhance Metro, making sure we have the Metro going over the Wilson Bridge. I think those are much more important projects, prioritized projects right now. than the Bay Bridge. I mean, if you build it, they will come. I'm an environmentalist. I did 22 river audits. We've fought to clean up the Bay. We made great strides during my tenure as Attorney General. I don't want to have more sprawl on the Eastern Shore. I don't think that's what people want. We just should not have people driving over the Bay Bridge during rush hour in the middle of the summer months, for Friday afternoons and Sunday mornings. You have to plan your trips better. But while I'm not vehemently against it, I certainly would not put that as a high priority right now. Well, there are a lot of talented, nice people in this race, but very few of them have ever run for public office, let alone held the office of dog catcher. More than half have not. And I think people really want experience as we come out of a crisis. They want somebody like that knows how to work the levers of government. For example, I led the statewide effort on marriage equality when I thought it was very important for people to be able to marry those who they loved. And for that, I was literally impeachment proceedings were started against me by the far right Republicans. I think we're going to see the same urgency around women's reproductive rights going forward, and making sure that we have a Democrat who can actually win the general election, who's been vetted, who has experience to lead. And so I think women's reproductive rights is going to be a critical issue. I think crime's a critical issue. There is no other candidate in the race that has a scintilla of background in the criminal justice field and knows the difference between a conviction or indictment. So I think that's going to be critical in terms of keeping people safe. I think being a pro-business advocate, making sure we have a more of a moderate view on economic activity in our state is going to be also very important going forward, as is fighting climate change. I mean, I represent a state fighting fossil fuel companies in my private sector around climate change. I mean, I have the experience that no one else has in this race. My Lieutenant Governor Candace Hollingsworth was the former mayor of Hyattsville. We're the only two people in the race with both having executive experience, which I think is critical right now. I've led during a time of crisis. We're in a time of crisis. We're coming out of a time of crisis, hopefully soon, and we need someone with that experience. People don't want to fly on a plane with a pilot who has not, flown before and just read about it. So I think that's going to be critical as we go forward.